I got to start recording this because we can't miss that kind
It
of
is. It is
material.
recording. You're good.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a great topic, Ted. I mean, I asked you for topics the other day,
Well, and I meant to send you some. So there you go.
There's that follow through you're talking about.
No, it's the thought that counts. You keep forgetting that. It's the thought. It's the thought.
Oh, the thought that counts. I do keep forgetting about that. Yeah.
I
It's like
thought
the
about
thought
it
of
while
reinforcement
watching
counts,
TV
right?
and eating a snack on the sofa with bugs.
See what I did there, bringing it back around to the topic. The thought of
Pretty good.
reinforcing the student counts. Ted, I think we should use today, and I don't mean to pick on you, but I think we should use the smoking thing we talked about when we were presenting in Idaho,
What smoking thing?
about the power of immediacy of reinforcement
Because
versus
no one-
like
no one-
altering behavior.
We could, because no one here is smoking right now.
Have you quit?
I'm not smoking right now.
Okay, so have you quit? I mean,
No, at this current moment, he's
at
not
this
smoking.
current moment. So you're not receiving any immediate reinforcement from the cigarette.
I'm not, well, from you and Kate, I am.
You are. You're getting a lot of positive praise and attention, and we're actually so the owl behind me. We named
Augie?
Augie. We named the owl Augustus Bartholomew Albertson, and just to save the drama and suspense, that makes ABA. But we've nicknamed him Augie, and we're gonna get some like squishy owls with little monogrammed ABA on it.
I love it.
Owlie's a good name, though. You could name him Owlie.
The funny thing is that Augustus is actually a family name. Like a bunch of people in my family were named Augustus.
Oh.
I don't know if it was Augustus or hey,
Hi.
Katie.
No, I just saw the Albertson and I was like, oh, it's like the grocery store.
I thought it was cute. My daughter, for those of you listening and that care, told me that I had to name the owl. She really liked the owl. So we came up with a cute little name for him, and we're going to start selling plush animals with the owl. It'll be available on our Facebook web.
He's just kidding, everybody. We're not that fancy.
Yes, we are.
Just kidding. Exactly that fancy.
We are
exactly that fancy. Katie, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good. We were just talking about Ted smoking. He's not smoking right.
I'm not smoking right now.
Dude, that's awesome.
We're providing him positive reinforcement for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, but Katie, you're being misled. Ted's saying he's not smoking. He's not currently smoking, like at this very moment.
At this very second. Yeah.
It's amazing how many people have nothing better to do than to split hairs. And Chad, you don't have that many left to split.
I don't. Just on my face, and they're all gray. Right?
They've all moved. So you're like that Woolly Willy toy with the magnet and the.
Every day, sometimes like I wake up and I go out and I catch myself in a mirror and I realize like one side of my beard is like going off in this direction and one side's going straight down, and it makes me look a little unique. Let's just say that.
Does that happen when you drive with the window open?
Sometimes, and especially when I stick my head out the window,
okay.
As I'm driving and kind of get that K9 effect going on. Yeah. The breeze just kind of floats it up. And if I really want to make an impression, just kind of get a lot of full body to the beard.
Oh, on a motorcycle. Yeah.
Exactly. But no, it's not really splitting hairs. I mean, I think it's a good point. We're reinforcing Ted. He's not smoking at this moment. So we're kind of shaping his behavior. We're accepting an approximation of it, right?
I guess. So the lead-in today is using Ted smoking as an example.
Poor Ted.
I know this. Good plan.
You know what, Ted? You do you.
That owl behind Chad is full of judgment.
Yeah, no. We're gonna put a little cigarette coming out the owl's mouth.
When do we get to use an example for you?
No, the owl needs to just move his head like.
So just to catch everybody up and let you know I'm not picking on Ted. We were talking about like immediacy when we did the Idaho thing. And I was talking more like punishment and kind of the importance of immediacy of consequence to a behavior and how it alters a behavior. And I used the smoking versus the COVID as an example, right? Like we've been telling people for years that smoking causes cancer, but it's this delayed consequence. It's not an immediate thing. But with COVID, you see people altering their behavior by wearing masks, because of the immediacy of the consequence. And then Ted, being Ted and being much more intelligent than I am, led into the fact about when you smoke a cigarette, there's also this very immediate reinforcement associated to the body. So he just kind of expanded on it for me.
Well, there's also the immediacy of the negative reinforcement with COVID. You know, because with the COVID thing, I haven't gotten it. You haven't gotten it. Kate, you haven't gotten it. I don't know anyone. I know people who've gotten it. I don't know anyone who's gotten it. No, I know one person and he got better. But there's a lot of verbal mediation going on there. You know, there's a lot of rule governed behavior, and there's a lot of social pressure there. And so there is immediacy of reinforcement. I wear the mask. I avoid those disapproving looks. I avoid the, you know, I avoid people saying, "Hey, Hitler, put the mask on." You know, I avoid all sorts of things.
Wow, we're getting started this morning, people.
Good morning.
Because there are diseases down the road, you know, a few hours to a few days. But, you know, the social judgment is right there. And the problem with behavior maintained by negative reinforcement brought about by rule-governed contingencies is it can go on for years and years and years, even after the negative reinforcer is gone. Yeah. Think about the Japanese soldiers after World War II who stayed in the jungle for 30 and 40 years, you know, because the enemy's out there. And the longer they stay where they are, the longer they hide, the better, you know, the more reinforced that behavior gets.
So I think this is a great time for two things. One, I think we need to get better at introducing ourselves when we start the show, just so people think, you know that we do have some credentials when we talk. But Ted's going to hold up a sign. I think you should write a sign, Ted, and just hold it up, and or just have like a laser pointer to your degrees. But I'm Chad Honeycutt, board certified behavior analyst, special education teacher. Anybody else want to introduce themselves? The cat.
Awesome. Ted Hoke, Isam Dr. Kopenchensky, Analizi, Professor E. Litsenseran, Vuchbitatel.
Yeah, that would be Bulgarian.
I'm not going to practice my Bulgarian this morning. It won't sound as good as Ted's, but maybe next time, guys. I'm Katie. I'm a behavior specialist with the company, and I taught for a couple years in the self-contained autism classroom.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate West Hazelwood. I'm a BCBA and also a certified K-12 special education gen ed teacher.
Very cool. So that was great. So for those you don't know, we do some work over in Bulgaria. We've kind of fallen in love with the country and the people. And next week we're starting a parent webinar series in Bulgaria through this medium, which will be kind of cool. We've already had people signing up for it. That'll be a lot of fun. So
there is a parent webinar though for the United States. Or if you don't,
it gets confusing.
Yeah, we have a lot going on.
It's on Mondays at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So join Marie and I if you're interested.
May I put in a plug for evidence-based counseling solutions?
You may, Ted. Go ahead. We're going to reinforce your plug.
We have, Chad, you and I have to talk. We have a couple groups beginning.
Really?
The first week in June, I hope. 3 of them, actually. A couple for parents on, we're calling them, what are we calling them? Getting better behavior from your kid. Getting better behavior from your kid. It's going to be a 10-part group.
Wow.
Meeting 10 times. And a couple mindfulness groups. Get your head in the game.
I love it.
Groups.
Yeah.
So,
So yeah, for those you don't know, we kind of created a sister company called Evidence-Based Counseling Solutions. It really developed, well, for a couple of reasons. One, because Ted has this, depth of knowledge that goes well beyond just the applied behavior analysis, but also just with the COVID and the changes to the world, especially for a lot of our teacher peers and friends, there's a lot of people struggling with a lot of things. And so we decided to kind of open up that avenue as well to help support people that way as well. So if you're interested in any of that, please reach out to us through our Facebook page. I will even put my email into the chat window. And
I hope to have registration pages open this weekend, but again, we have to talk.
Yeah, that would be cool. We could link it to the Facebook page. But
yeah, so, and so for those of us, for those of you that are watching on Facebook Live, you can't see the chat, but send us a message via Facebook and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, or just make a comment below. We'll get to it.
Yeah, smoke signals, whatever. We'll find you. But I want to cycle back around to something, because we probably said the words negative reinforcement several times at the very beginning of this broadcast, and That is a really difficult concept for a lot of people. So I think it would be a great idea if we just took a minute and clarified what Ted was talking about and just talk about what negative reinforcement is. It's funny, my teenage son actually asked me about it yesterday, and I gave this very teenage appropriate response to it. But does anybody want to like just throw out negative reinforcement, like what it is? Because it's a powerful thing. We use it a lot.
I can. Want me to throw?
Yeah, throw something at us.
Throw them down. Yo.
Oh, no. No,
no. No.
Oh, but I'm good at throwing down. Okay. Okay, I'll break it down for you one time.
Let's hear about negative reinforcement.
Yeah. You know, what reinforcement is, you know, a consequence operation so that behavior happens, something happens after it. There's a change in the person's world immediately after. And that results in either more of that behavior over time or that behavior continuing to occur over time.
So can we also
now,
break
positive
down
and negative in behavior analysis?
Mm-hmm.
What?
I was just going to say, break down.
Oh, Kate, you froze. I'm sad.
Oh, no.
Unless I froze.
Can you see me?
I see you.
Okay, can you break down the misconception of negative? Because that's the big problem.
Well, negative means bad, right?
Negative means bad, right?
Yeah,
Automatically, we have
bad.
to assume it's bad.
But it doesn't. Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If I had thunder, Kate now has it because she stole it. What you know, in behavior analysis, just like in any other science, in mathematics, positive means stuff gets added, negative means stuff gets removed. It's not like positive reinforcers or positive stuff is stuff we like and negative stuff is stuff we dislike, because we actually like some of the consequences that are negative reinforcers.
Absolutely.
I like when it's cold and rainy outside, being able to come in and I'm no longer cold and rainy. I like when the bad guy is after me, being able to duck in somewhere and the bad guy can't find me. I like that stuff, right? I like those changes in my world. Positive means something is added. Negative means something is removed. Reinforcement means there's a change in the world immediately following my behavior that gives me more of that behavior. So positive reinforcement is behavior happens, something is added to my world, or there's more of something at that time, and that gives me more of that behavior over time, or the behavior keeps going over time. Negative reinforcement is behavior happens, something is lessened or removed in my world, and that behavior continues over time, or I get more of it over time. So kind of like, think about this. I have an itch. I don't really, but I'm acting, watching my acting skills. Really good acting skills. Let's say I have an itch. Okay, it itches right here. What do? I scratch. What that does is it makes the itch go away. Okay, what happens then is let's say I'm a baby and it's the first time I ever scratched an itch. Well, made the itch go away, didn't it? So under that circumstance, the itch, I'm more likely to scratch again. Or the sun is in my eyes. I do this. The sun is no longer in my eyes. Well, under that circumstance, assuming this is a negative reinforcer, it's 1968 and I'm into having the sun in my eyes because
that was a thing. Yeah, okay.
There were substances involved, but it's not 1968 anymore. So, sun's in my eyes, I do this, sun's not in my eyes anymore. Well, under that circumstance, since that worked that way, I'm likely to do that again. By the same token, you ask me to do something that I don't really feel like doing right now.
Which one was that? The additional slides?
The what? Yeah.
The slides for the last section of
there are so many of them. You ask me to do something I don't want to anymore. I smack you, I swear at you, I give you the old boot in the groin, and you stop. You double over in pain. You whine. You cry. Okay, that's something added. But what also happens is the demand goes away.
Right.
I don't have to do that anymore. Well, this is assuming that I'm more likely to do that in the future under that circumstance. That's negative reinforcement.
Wow.
You present something, a task demand. I do something that turns off that task demand. Whether it's whining, crying, screaming, kicking, spitting, ripping up the work, throwing the work on the floor, running out of the room, task demand goes away. Well, I'm more likely to do that in the future.
Yeah, I'm sure that sounds very familiar to a lot of people.
I used that as an example in the parent webinar this week. We said, when it's homeschool time, the kid's sitting at the table with you, you present an item or a task, something, and they just start screaming, crying, saying that you're the meanest mommy ever, yada, yada, yada. Well, it's distracting now to the other students, to the other kids at the table. And they're just like, just go to your room. It's more negatively reinforcing for the parent because there's this aversive right here. It's bothering everybody. It just needs to go away because they can't continue on with what they're doing. And the kids won. So now what we're going to see the next day and the day after that is the probability that given a task I don't want to do. And I think, this is so often seen. I know we got in that conversation about day treatment, and we also got with that idea of like the office, right? The kid is throwing a temper tantrum. They're saying, no, I don't want to do this. You can't make me. And they just, it's very easy to go click that button that says, click, hi, I'm sending a student down to the office. That's super negatively reinforcing for the teacher.
Right. So just to because this is so tricky, negative reinforcement is so tricky. The negative part, that taking away part, is taking away that aversive stimulus. So it's taking away that noise. It's taking away the sun in your eyes. It's taking away the itch, which is confusing because when we think of adding, which would be positive reinforcement, that's when you're adding something that's good. But with negative, it's that taking away. So I just wanted to make sure before we rolled on.
Yes. And the other thing that people get confused on is what you do to take it away is the actual behavior that will increase. And Ted's example, one of the examples I use is like a headache, right? If I've got a lot of back pain, so if I have back pain and I take 2 Tylenol and it takes like 4 hours for the Tylenol to work, but when I take an Aleve, the back pain goes away right away. I'm more likely to take the Aleve whenever I have the pain occur again. So the actual thing that you do to remove the aversive is the behavior. And I love Ted's example, and Kate kind of expanded on it too, because it speaks so much to instructional control. And Katie talked a lot about instructional control on Tuesday. I think it was Tuesday. I'm starting to lose track of days now. But, in Ted's example, we've all seen that kid, right? And now we see him at pre-K level, kindergarten level, and you put any kind of demand in front of them that they don't want to do, kind of interrupts their day. And I'm talking about Gen Ed kids, not students with disabilities. Just we're seeing this in a lot of just Gen Ed 4, 5, 6-year-olds now. They kick, they hit, they spit, they throw something, they turn over a desk, and then all of a sudden the demand's completely removed. We stop asking them to do what we asked them to do. They had instructional control over themselves because they were able to control the schedule of their own reinforcement. Their behavior, throwing the desk, kicking you, spitting at you, got rid of the aversive. So the next time that you do it, they're going to do that again.
Well, and sometimes a couple things here. One, just backing up a little bit, the positive and negative, again, they refer to something being added, something being removed, not something being nice and something being bad, or something feel good, something feeling bad. Because the fact is, some of our positive reinforcers do not feel good. Any of you ever stick your tongue on the 2 terminals of one of those square 9-volt batteries?
I have not.
I'm struggling with where you're going with this.
Okay.
I'm excited.
Have you done that more than once?
Have I?
You wouldn't.
And then you did it again, didn't you?
But there was
positive reinforcement, and it's electric shock.
Is it a generational thing?
Another thing. In your example, there's a bit of a lag between taking the Aleve and the pain going away, right?
Yeah.
Now that works for you because you have a long history of, reading directions and believing the directions because the directions worked out that way, right? Because stuff works out. And if you do it once or twice and it doesn't work, then you stop taking the Aleve. But you do it and it works, so you keep doing it under that circumstance. Well, a lot of the kids we work with, we come up with sometimes pretty silly interventions.
We do.
Like, okay, when things are really bad, instead of flipping the desk, do some deep breathing. Well, wait a second. The deep breathing only works if the deep breathing functions to make the bad thing go away, right?
Right.
That's not really a good replacement behavior. And some bad things are actually stuff that we need to learn how to tolerate or actually sort of like. So we come up with interventions that aren't going to work because, unlike you with the Aleve, that learner doesn't have that learning history of do it now and later on the bad thing stops.
Yeah.
Instead, the learner has a much stronger learning history and a more recent one of do it now and the bad thing stops.
And I think we got to take a moment because that is such a good example. And I hate to just
you're so full of hate.
All your brilliance, but I think to kind of frame it in a very special education kind of teacher way. Kate, you and I have had a lot of conversations about some IEPs that we've read before. But think about what we do in some IEPs sometimes. I would be very hard pressed to believe that special education teacher.
I know exactly where you're going. I know exactly where you're going.
When upset or angry, we'll use self-regulating techniques such as counting to 10, deep breathing techniques in order to not be angry anymore. And basically what we're doing in that situation is allowing that learner to never do the behavior we actually want them to do, because what's in making them angry is the antecedent of being a task demand being put in front of them or a condition that they didn't want. So within the IEP, we actually sometimes embed things that work against the learner's progress for more functional behavior. And that's a super point. I've never really, you always say things, Ted, and then I just like latch on to your
But you know what? But you know what, Chad? You know, we've talked about replacement behaviors. And I think, unfortunately, you know, we have this, like we're angry, we're upset, we can't measure, observe that, but, you know, we go ahead and, let's say we go ahead and define. Rarely do we ever see that, but let's say they did. So we define what is angry, what is upset. People are assuming that these self-regulation tools are replacement behaviors. And it's like, no, because remember, the replacement behaviors have to serve the same function as the behavior. And so that's the problem, is that most of the time when we see that goal in there, they're thinking that they're doing the correct thing by putting in a replacement behavior. But when in actuality, we're not.
Yeah. You're just facilitating the escape, right?
Yes.
And really what you want is for the kid to do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what's going to serve the kid is the kid doing the work. Go ahead.
Or accept any type of aversive demand, right? Something they don't want. And I think that's one of the reasons, and Guy K, you and I have talked about a lot, especially over the course of these webinars with these young kids. We've gotten involved in preschool and kindergarten so much this year and just seen some really extreme behavior. And I think it's because that they come into school and school has task demand. And raise your hand if you ever heard, you know, all the teachers out there, raise your hand if you ever heard a parent say, well, I never see this behavior from my kid at home. Well, that's because they don't really have any demand placed on them, right? Like that's, you know, something that we all have to learn. I mean, there's certain things in life we just don't like, but we can't have this reaction of throwing a table over, spitting at somebody, and then having a lot of attention poured on us, telling us to breathe deeply, and then it all be removed, you know. So.
I think in education, like a lot of our responses are as adults are negative reinforcement, right? Yeah. You know, for parents, you know, the kid throws a temper tantrum when you present some kind of task demand. You do it a few times, you don't have time to deal with it, so you're just like, whatever, move on. But then the same thing starts to happen in school, where the reason why the parents no longer see that behavior is because they're no longer, like you said, putting the task demand on it, but now we're in school, we're putting task demand on. And so what happens is the kid not only displays the behavior they previously showed at home, they've now increased it a bit because, you know, the first few times didn't work like it did at home. And so we're seeing even a greater magnitude of the behavior. But I think, you know, slowly but surely we start to see what parents did at home, we start to see the same thing in education with the adults. And I was just kind of sitting here thinking, when you were talking about the IEPs, you know, we see a lot of these things. Sometimes I wonder, the accommodations, the modifications, the goals that we put in, we're like, why is this here? I wonder if it's because the parent during an IEP meeting was maybe chirping. And so to negatively reinforce the inappropriate, like they just needed it to go away. They needed to end the meeting because they the teacher needed to go back to class or do this, it's like, fine, we're going to go ahead and put this in. And that's how we get all these things in these IEPs that we're like, wait, why was this here? And it's like, if we really went back, it's like, oh, well, the meeting went on for 2 hours and it just needed to end. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like, does that make sense? Like, I think I think we really, you know, we really need to take a step back and think, if we're using, you know, if it keeps happening over and over and over again, that means we're using some sort of reinforcer. And if we have to think, is it benefiting the individual or is it benefiting myself to have this aversive go away? I don't know, something to think about.
Yeah, for sure. I know I had seen a lot of IEPs with different accommodations put into them that were just in there for the sake of being in there, you know?
Yeah, and it's like, that doesn't need, and Dad, we got on that talk a while ago about modifications. It's like, we don't need that. Like, no, they need to learn how to do this instead of just putting a modification or this accommodation in place.
Yeah. I can't remember who said, I want to kind of bounce back around to function. I know function came up, and if you've ever worked with a BCBA, I'm sure you've heard function. How important is function to reinforcement?
Completely.
Yeah. 100%.
There you go. Like
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, Ted, we got a check.
if the event doesn't function as a reinforcer, you can call it whatever you want, but it's not a reinforcer. Yeah. You can call what you're doing whatever you want, but if you don't get more of the behavior, it's not reinforcement. Mm-hmm. You know, reinforcement is defined by the effect on the behavior, and that it's a consequence operation. It's not defined by your intentions. It's not defined by anything else. It's just, if a change that occurs in the world, in that learner's world, immediately after an instance of the behavior occurs, results in more of that behavior over time, then it's reinforcement.
Yeah, and this is something we push a lot when we talk about it in our webinars or if we're pushing in your classroom. Big difference between reinforcers and just preferred items or activities. So just like Ted said, reinforcers have to increase a behavior. So if it's not increasing a behavior, it's not actually reinforcing. It's just a preferred activity that we thought might be a reinforcer.
Yeah, so that's the best when we're like, so what are we using as like reinforcement? And they're like, oh, this and this and this and this. And we're like, even if it's just near the kid has no interaction with it. And we're like, is this really a reinforcer? Like, they don't really seem to like that. And it's like, it goes to the whole Skittles. Everyone assumes, everyone's passing out Skittles. And they're like, they never want to do anything. Like, nothing works. And it's like, well, yeah, because you're only using one level of reinforcement with the Skittles. Maybe they don't like the taste of Skittles. I hate Skittles personally. So if someone
maybe they're sick of them, like
satiation. Yeah.
You got to switch it up.
Yeah. Katie always used to have animal crackers in her room. And that was
I did. I had a lot of visitors
down there for those. But no, the reason why I brought up the function thing, week one, we talked about ABA coming into schools, and Ted, you and I talked about some of the barriers when we presented the Boise State group. And one of them was the rigidity of kind of the nature of schools. And someone was relaying a conversation to me. I'm not going to mention any names. I'm not going to mention the school. I'm not going to mention the administrator. But administrator was telling her that she didn't believe in that function stuff, that those functions just don't really exist. And she had gotten to that point because she watched a webinar that a teacher with a bachelor's of science degree in education had put together and just said, all every kid needs is just a really stern individual in their life. And that's how you solve behavior. And the reason why I bring that up, function is extremely important. If a kid, you don't understand the function, reinforcement will never work, A. And B, if we have that, I mean, that's an administrator, a school administrator that's spreading that mindset.
And aren't prisons full of really stern people? And
I was about to say, if that was true,
on festive occasions, prisoners misbehave sometimes.
Well, and if that was true, then that means that the TV show, whatever, Scared Straight would have been like super effective, but the research found that it wasn't, correct?
Yep.
Well, it's interesting that I know in the state of Virginia, the Department of Juvenile Justice is moving towards applied behavior analysis, just because behavior doesn't change. Like we've learned that punitive measures doesn't necessarily change behavior that way. But what that person, what that administrator is missing is that child, hopefully they didn't have a trauma in their life, right? Like that's something that's not, we need to consider at all. But you being stern to a student could still be attention. And you could be reinforcing the very behavior that you don't want to be reinforcing because you're being stern and, providing attention. That kid is like, hey, well, this is better than anything that I'm getting. So I'll just keep doing this, because when I do it, you take me to your office, you tell me how bad I am, you tell me what I should have been doing, what I didn't do. And
you humiliate me, you tell me I'm stupid, you tell me I'm bad, you call me scum. There are some people who pay good money for that. Yeah, so you don't want to teach the child to become one of them. But then there's a whole industry built around that. Let's not keep it going.
Well, yeah, I think of. Sorry. No, I was just going to say, like, I think of like going back to that whole strict thing. Like, I think of my partner personally. Like, I've heard the childhood story. They were getting a spanking, whatever. We're not going to get into that debate, but he looked at, like, at 5, he looked at his parents and said, "That's all you got." Like, clearly that, and like that, that didn't work. And so they quickly realized, and as like, I've like, interacted with him too. It's like, no, like that kind of punitive, like my voice when I get upset gets very teachery, and it gets very stern and stoic. And he's like, "I can't talk to you right now. Like I can't." And it's like, so clearly the stern thing doesn't.
Well, and some of our brought that up was the credential thing, and why I wanted to introduce ourselves at the very, very beginning, because I don't know if you guys have heard, but schools are closed and everything's shut down, and now all of a sudden you're getting all these webinars floating up here, and there are a lot of people throwing out a lot of crazy stuff, and they're not credentialed to be talking about the things that they are talking about. I know we were circulating one kind of as a joke within our group about how to be like a master disciplinarian in school. Like, is that something we really want to be? Is that what we want to achieve? I want teachers to be a master teacher.
Well, because also what people don't realize is that when, ethically within our world, if we're moving into the realm of punishment, that means that we've exhausted all resources with reinforcement. And when we go into the use of punishment, like we really have to make sure it's ethically appropriate, and that, what else am I thinking of? What are the other words? That it's just important that it's ethically appropriate, but we also have to work through and discuss with the team what could be the ramifications of using this procedure.
Well, and there are rare occasions where you don't want to exhaust everything else first, right? Like if the truck is barreling down the road and my kid is standing in the road, I don't want to wait until my kid's on the sidewalk to reinforce, right?
Yes.
I'm going to do something now. I'm going to get the kid out of the street, and I'm going to punish that behavior.
Yes.
Because I do not want that to repeat. But that's a highly dangerous behavior.
Yes, thank you.
My work on the floor is not a highly dangerous behavior. No. Saying an offensive word is not, under most circumstances, a highly dangerous behavior. A lot of times people default to punishment because it's what they know, and they're not even aware that they're doing it.
Throwing a crayon or throwing, yes, I understand that. Like,
wrestle them to the floor.
You can throw, like, if you throw a pencil, yes, I understand. But a lot of the times it's like we're not like doing this. It's more like, no. So it's like, you really have to, I like that you clarified for us, like, dangerous behaviors.
Mm-hmm. And there are, you mentioned, is that all you got? There are, sadly enough, a good number of learners, and we here have met them, who have been through some pretty awful stuff and still go through some really awful physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, pretty much torture. And you're going to yell at me? Is that the worst you're going to do? The fact is, for some of our learners, we're never going to match or exceed what they've already endured. Why even bother trying? The thing is, when people don't understand that, again, teaching, behavior analysis, same thing. It's all about the procedures. It's all about testing the procedures. It's not about how good I am. It's about testing the procedures, which means we have to be aware of the procedures, and we have to watch what we're doing and watch the effects that we're getting. And if what we're doing is working, we keep doing it. And if what we're doing isn't working, we do something else. And that's what it comes down to. But we only get to that point when we're able to observe what we're doing while we're doing it. And I think that's why a lot of people default to punishment, because in their history, it's worked, and they don't exercise that kind of awareness, watching what they're doing while they're doing it.
Right. And don't get me, I mean, from the standpoint of behavior analysis, I mean, we know that punishment is a powerful thing in terms of behavior change, right? I mean, it does work. There's a lot of unfortunate research that shows it. What I'm saying certainly is that schools just don't do punishment well, and schools aren't really designed to be a punitive kind of place. And I think of one specific case I got involved with an FBA, and it was a middle school student. And essentially what was happening was every time this girl would cuss the principal, she would be sent home. Her mom would come pick her up and take her, drop her off at the house, where social services knew she did drugs, had a boyfriend, you know, was doing all kinds of things that we didn't really want this girl doing except being in school. And she had figured out pretty quickly that all she had to do was to cuss at the principal, and the principal punished her in his mindset by suspending her.
Because we're not looking at the consequence of it's not from the perspective of the individual, it's from the perspective of us. And that example, we can translate very easily into elementary school. Number one thing we punish, taking away recess.
Absolutely. How often do we take away recess from the same kid? I mean, it's like...
And maybe what we need to do with the kids whose recess we're taking away is get them more active more often. So, because when you deprive someone of something, it becomes more valuable. I was thinking, you know how I like come up with examples of stuff? Weird, isn't it? But I was sweeping the kitchen floor yesterday, as I'm wont to do on festive occasions. And, you know, there's the dry dog food that fell out of the bowl, and it's been sitting there for a day. And I didn't care, and the dogs didn't care. But suddenly the broom comes out, and I start sweeping it up. And the dog runs over and has to have that piece of dry dog food on it because it's about to go away. Scarcity increases value. And if you're depriving the kid of recess and physical activity, what you may well be doing is a kid for whom physical activity the rest of that day is a much bigger reinforcer, and the kid's going to be active at the worst possible times for you as the teacher, because activity is really, really important right now. I got to run around. I got to throw stuff. I got to do stuff. Could I bring up something else that really, really grinds my gears as you?
Oh, Ted,
yes.
Please. Yes. Okay. I'm now excited. Yep.
This notion that when a child is doing what's called misbehavior in a classroom, what we do is we empty the entire classroom except that one child.
Yeah.
Okay, let's think about this. You're the teacher. I'm the student. You say, okay, time for our spelling test. I give you the finger. All of a sudden, everyone has to leave the classroom and go to the classroom next door. And it's just me and you in the classroom. And as long as I, every so often, do something that extends the time of that classroom being emptied, not only do I get a break from learning, not only do I avoid that spelling test that I escaped so artfully a little bit earlier, but the whole day is disrupted for all of my classmates and my classmates in the classroom next door.
Yep.
What is this?
And they get attention. They get to hang out. Yeah, they get one-on-one attention.
Well, and you hear
access to stuff, because you're not allowed to touch the kids, right?
Right.
So they get to throw stuff, knock stuff over, do all sorts of things.
Well, and you also hear the teacher, you know, and on the side, like, are you calm yet? Are you
right?
Yeah.
Well, I was until you said that.
Now let's go.
For the
Let's
reminder.
do this.
So for everybody listening out there, I mean, especially if you're an administrator, your teacher just want to advocate. Again, I go back to this pre-K kindergarten thing, and just the magnitude of behaviors that we're seeing out of early childhood and kindergarten in kids that have no disability classifications. They're just having problem interfering behaviors. And what's happening is the trends that we see is they're learning that these behaviors are what I want to do when I come across something I don't want, or what I want to do when I want to get a lot of individual attention. And I will give some credit to the team. I mean, probably throwing up the middle finger is not going to clear the classroom, but certainly what we do see, and we've all observed it, is, student starts to escalate, so we clear the classroom, and then we just allow them to continue to go and go and go and go, even once the classroom's out. So that they've not only gotten access to everything that they wanted, they've also gotten this individual attention. And Katie, I think it was right before the pandemic hit. We had those dueling kindergartners that time. Katie and I in the classroom, and it completely gen ed, right? They didn't know IEPs.
It was a gen ed, yeah.
And we were in there to observe one kid, and two kids just decided they were going to start running around the classroom. And the typical kind of approach was whenever they did that, they would clear the classroom. And Katie started working with one, I started working with another, and it was like these dueling kindergartners. And I still hold a grudge. You beat me. You got yours doing math. Katie, I look over and I still got this girl screaming at me and yelling at me.
It was a good moment. It was a nice day.
I wrote it down in my journal.
Yeah, like it's not a big deal, but there's a star by that date in my journal.
What she did was so simple. It was just, she established a relationship really quickly with the kid. And then she had something that he wanted, and she put a contingency on it. Not a huge one. Touch something. Oh, okay, yeah, thanks for touching it. And I reinforce it. And then she just gradually built up from there. And I remember watching you with that kid and sitting and working with them. And then this is kind of the thing. I think last week we talked about, or when we were doing the Idaho thing, we talked about what we do is really not that complicated, but it's recognizing where to fade ourselves out sometimes that is complicated. So what she did really well was once he got some momentum going, she backed away from him. She removed her attention, that close proximity, and then would reintroduce it on a really fixed schedule. And that was what was maintaining his behavior. And it's such an important thing. But Ted's right. I mean, we allow these students, especially these younger students right now, to control their own schedule of reinforcement, and effectively from a functional standpoint and how they behave in the classroom, it makes us as the educators a relative if they're controlling their own reinforcement.
Well, and teachers really need to follow the policies of the schools, and they need to do what they're trained to do and what they're required to do. And so I don't mean to demean or criticize any teacher who's cleared the classroom under those conditions, because that's the policy.
Right.
But, when you think about one kid is doing something, so let's affect the educational opportunities for 39 other kids at that moment. So there's that aspect of it. And it may not have the effect that's intended. I mean, it may ensure safety, perhaps. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's that aspect of it that is being, well served. But at the same time, it is permitting that escape if the behavior is under control of some sort of negative reinforcement contingency. And so that on a higher up administrative level or at a school division level, that thing needs to be rethought. And I know it's there because you're not allowed to touch kids, and because there's been restraint and kids have been hurt and schools have been sued and all of this. But that really is something that needs more thought, because it's not always the most helpful thing.
Could we talk through planned ignoring? Because that's something that's very misunderstood.
Let's clarify one thing, because I think he left a little bit hanging there. We're not saying in this that the solution is to take the kid out of the classroom either. Right. No. We want to deal with the behavior where it's occurring. So from our perspective, and again, just kind of what do you call it? Like not a warning, but disclaimer. We're not saying to do anything that is that contradicts your school policy. We understand policy is kind of wrapped up in a lot of bureaucracy and red tape sometimes, and you've got to follow that just to keep yourself safe. But from our perspective, if that situation was occurring, we deal with the behavior where it's occurring. We don't remove the class, we don't remove the kid, and we try to redirect.
Because either could be reinforcing to the behavior. Because if we take the kid out, he's still escaping the situation. He still gets away from it.
Mm-hmm. And the fact is, there are 900 other tools available to you that a lot of times we're not aware of, like really cool group contingencies, or really what I want at that moment. Kate brought up the planned ignoring. What I want at that moment is for you to do what I'm asking you to do. Well, maybe what I do is I behave as though I don't notice you doing what you're doing, but I do attend to the students who are doing the right thing. And maybe as an adjunct to that, at a time when the behavior is not happening, when I have the time, I teach you to complain the right way. I teach you to grumble the right way.
Right.
You know, I teach you to express your dislike for it the right way, which is just, oh man, or I don't want to do this, but I'll do it, you know, and get on with the job. There are 800 other things we could do.
Yeah.
But again, we're talking about teachers who are very busy people. Who, and I don't, again, with this whole having the awareness, that's that whole mindfulness aspect. That's that whole practicing, observing what we're doing while we're doing it. And until you practice that a lot, it's difficult. And also, when you have 800 other things you need to be doing simultaneously, it's sometimes difficult.
Yep.
And the fact is, as we go through life, teachers included, as we go about our business, we're doing the best we can with what we have.
Yeah. Let's talk about plan ignoring, Kate. I think that's a fantastic topic because
well, I just think it's a very misunderstood topic because people focus on that word ignoring. And so they think I'm going to ignore the inappropriate behavior, which you're correct about. But the word planned is important because there's a plan with it. That's the way I like. Maria actually said that to me, and I was like, "Ooh, I like the way that sounds." Because once the inappropriate behavior is no longer occurring, that's when we put in place those schedules of reinforcement and we reinforce the appropriate behavior. So even, yes, the child might not be, you might have asked them to complete a task and their response was screaming, crying, kicking. But as soon as they stop that inappropriate behavior, our focus is not as much the task right now. It's not screaming, crying, kicking, any of that. So it's important that we're just saying, thank you for just being quiet. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you for putting that desk back in place. And what's funny about it is like the kids, at first you might see a little bit of I think the word is reuptake. We might see it first again, the behavior occur again, because that's what happens. Because what we were doing was we were putting an inappropriate behavior on extinction and reinforcing the appropriate behavior.
Yeah.
But what's funny sometimes, like I remember when I was working with a kid before this and they were screaming at me and I just ignored it. And then when they stopped, I said, "Thank you for sitting quietly. I really appreciate that." And they just looked at me for a few seconds and then they went back at it and I just ignored. And then by the end of it, they, stopped screaming, but they then picked up the desk. And I was like, "Thanks for picking up that desk. I think I see a chair that needs to be picked up." They go and pick up the chair. And what was funny, I left the classroom and I came back and that kid gave me a huge hug. You know what I mean? So yeah. I think it's important that we remember planned ignoring is not just ignoring. There's a plan with it and it's to reinforce the appropriate behavior. And once we, like Ted was saying, there's 900 other things. Planned ignoring is just the first step because we're building up that behavior momentum to then put in place the contingency of the original task demand and completing it for the ultimate reinforcer.
Yeah.
Sorry, I rambled.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's such a good point because there is the misunderstanding that ignoring an extinction has nothing to do with reinforcement, but it does. Yes, you're going to ignore, you're going to put something on extinction, but you're going to reinforce something else. You have to, unless we're talking about behavior
self-interest.
Self-interest type thing, right? That you can't functionally reinforce, but you have to have that plan. And it's such an important concept, and really that is how we deal with behavior more so than anything else. We ignore, we put something on extinction, we reinforce an alternative behavior.
Well, and that's why as behavior analysts, that's why teachers don't like us. Yeah. That's why I got mad at Brian so much when he came into my classroom and, the kid would be having this full on tantrum and then like Brian would just walk into the class and be like, "Hey, what's up, man?" Like high five. And I'm like, no. But now that like I'm on the other side, I'm like, oh, reinforcing the appropriate behavior, like that makes sense. And then, he would put this contingency, "Hey, I need for you to get back on task for Miss Hazelwood." And they're like, "Okay, no problem."
And something that seemed to happen a lot when we were doing plan ignoring is sometimes kids will kind of, I think Kate kind of mentioned this, they'll go harder. Like they'll scream louder for a second. They might start doing more dangerous behaviors for a second. So it's also important to know that we're not saying if a child decides to then start climbing on furniture, which seems to be what happens a lot to me in a couple classrooms, especially this year.
Mm-hmm.
When we're doing planned ignoring, and all of a sudden they're like, well, I haven't seen that before. And we're not saying don't, take the child off the furniture, because you have to keep them safe. But as soon as they get back to a safe place, if they're not still screaming at you, like Kate said, get in there and reinforce.
Well, and you don't have to say, when you are having to help the child to get back to safety, you don't have to say, no, we are not climbing furniture. You don't have to give eye contact. Like, there are certain things that you don't have to do. And for a child,
it's better not to, because chances are the kids already heard that before and it hasn't worked. So why am I doing it again? And the kids already heard that before, while seeing someone's face turn beet red and that vein, throbbing right here.
Yep.
And all that's occurring while the kid's climbing all over everything, having a wonderful time, which made those things function as a conditioned positive reinforcer. And so without knowing it, you're positively reinforcing the behavior you don't want to happen.
And then cycling back around to function. I mean, I think in the elementary, especially early elementary, that attention is really one of the driving functions of a lot of the behavior that we see from preferred adults, especially. And we have this fancy type of data we collect called latency. And latency is just basically when a stimulus occurs and then how long after that occurrence does the behavior actually occur. So one of the things I would encourage you as teachers, kind of working together, go into each other's classrooms and keep a little latency data. Because the latency on when a appropriate behavior occurs from the time that it's reinforced, if it is ever reinforced, is a lot longer than the latency of a problem behavior to the time that it's punitively addressed. So a teacher is much more quick to immediately tell a child to be quiet or to sit down than they are to, hey, great job sitting down, when they catch the student in something that they wanted them doing. I don't know what happened to Katie. I wonder if she got
she'll be back.
But that's something I really encourage you guys to do. When we start talking about behavior, this is everywhere. This is not your school division. It's not your school. It's not your classroom. It's
not just your family.
Yeah, absolutely. It is something that is significant. And it is impacting a lot of classrooms all over the country.
I challenge, for whoever's listening, I challenge you to try to identify throughout just today an example of positive reinforcement and then also an example of negative reinforcement. Because it's funny, you think we're using these fancy terms that only apply in certain situations, and it's amazing how it's happening every other second, it feels like. So I challenge you, and if you feel like you met the challenge, go ahead and leave a comment, because it'd be interesting to see what everyone says.
Yeah, definitely on Facebook for sure. And
I just think it's funny. I think about it, especially because I'm not in schools. I feel my brain can't turn off the behavior stuff. So I'm doing certain things and I'm oh, an example of negative reinforcement. Oh, here's an example. And I'm wow, Kate, you really lost it in this quarantine.
Absolutely. And Facebook's so funny. We were talking about that at the very beginning, and there is no better example of social attention than Facebook. But kind of punishment as well, right? There is that kind of social consequence of not doing something that the entire group is. And depending on your perspective on whether you find that as a punisher or as a reinforcer, there are people out there that are reinforced when you start seeing some of these political discussions that get going on Facebook. They're reinforced by all the kind of
banter.
Yeah, the banter and the bad comments that get thrown their way, and you're a horrible person. Well, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing then.
And the consequence isn't as high as if it were in person, right? So no one can hurt you. No one can yell at your face, and you can turn it off whenever you want. So
the most dramatic thing that might happen is they may block you.
Right.
So when I'm supervising for BCBA candidates, one of the things I tell them a lot is to take things that when you can start making this stuff relevant to your to your everyday life, that's when the terminology, the concepts really sink in. Everybody uses Facebook. Think about how schedules of reinforcement work on Facebook. When you post something, how quickly somebody responds to it. There's so much attention that is kind of wound into social media. And sometimes people are doing behaviors on Facebook that are not appropriate. They probably are talking about things they shouldn't be talking about, but they're reinforced from people in their response and in their comments, so they continue to do it. There's a lot of lessons that can be taken away in just everyday life.
And what happens, you see shaping processes there too. If you watch over time, you see mild inappropriate morphing into, just incredibly, just flagrantly inappropriate, or flagrantly angry or vitriolic, because, people respond a little more to something a little more in that direction, and then a little more and a little more and a little more. And so it's not just eccentric, it's not just interesting, it's not just creative, it's just downright awful. And you see a lot of otherwise nice people get really awful when they're on Facebook.
Well, think about cyberbullying, right? When we take kind of a secondary look at this, the cyberbullying, it continues because the person doing it, putting the stuff up, gets attention from their peers by doing it. And everybody's kind of egging them on and reinforcing them. So they continue to do it. There's a lesson there.
I think of this stupid TikTok challenge recently.
Oh, yeah. We could.
But truthfully, this TikTok has become this huge thing. I don't have one, you guys. I can't dance. But anyway, people have gotten really big on TikTok because, they're promoting it as oh, you're moving during quarantine, and you get the likes and whatnot. And so people just keep going, and they're like, how much farther can we push it? And so they've pushed it farther into being mean and hurting, and trying to model somebody with a disability. And it's no, but people still do it.
So the challenge specifically she's mentioning is the autism one.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's many challenges, right?
Yeah,
that are fine. But this one, but this one specifically seemed, it's not something to promote. Yeah.
But will it keep happening? Probably, because, there's, unfortunately, I don't think it should, but it's getting attention as good or bad. It's still getting attention. So the inappropriate behavior is going to continue.
Well, and we've learned this lesson time after time. I don't know if it was Columbine that, the law was passed, or just, I don't know if it was a law, but an agreement was made. They wouldn't mention a shooter's name in the aftermath of something. We know this stuff to be true. And that's why I kind of get a kick out of somebody looking at us and saying, oh, I don't believe in that function stuff. I don't believe in that science, whatever.
Well, I think a lot of people have negative experiences. I've talked about this before, negative experiences with BCBAs or people that claim to understand and practice ABA well.
You mean being the ABA?
The ABA? Correct. Some people call themselves the ABA, which is not a thing, by the way. But yeah, I think there's a lot of misinformation and then bad experiences because people claimed to know the science and claimed to do it correctly. So as unfortunate as it is, it is out there, but we are trying to educate everyone to use it well. So
if you even think of teachers are phenomenal human beings, but there are also some not so great teachers out there. So
right, there's good and bad of everyone.
Let's name them all right now.
Yeah.
No,
we've got a list going.
We need to be careful just as consumers with all the webinars out there and with everything else. Make sure we're doing a little research, research us. That's fine. Google things that we say, with real sources.
One thing we pride ourselves on is accountability, for sure. We want that. So like Kay said, definitely research us. One thing that I would encourage you all to do is, especially if you see anybody come into your school that is talking ABA, if somebody is coming into your school and practicing ABA, they should be able to answer a question about their credentials. Ask them what their credentials are. If they're not a BCBA, they should be able to tell you the BCBA that's supervising them. That is
also when they're using that terminology. A lot of times people use fancy terminology, and again, I go back, ethics was I pride myself on ethics was the highest part on my test taking, but ethically we're supposed to be able to break down the jargon so that it can be easily understood by a novel individual who doesn't have as much experience with it. And so if someone's spouting information at you just to use the big fancy words, question it.
If we're really good, we never get anywhere near using the jargon.
Yes.
Because when you know it well enough, you can see and hear and think like a behavior analyst, but talk like a regular person.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's what with all my students at the university where I work. That's what I want from them. Because we don't have to convert the whole rest of the world to become behavior analysts, but we do got to work with them. And so, yeah, if you're hearing a lot of jargon, you're dealing with someone who's a newbie or someone who's just not that good at it yet.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that you kind of see this weird bleed and overlap. And like it says, I think probably one of our greatest barriers is that past experience. As we come into schools, it's one of the things that we kind of bump up against a lot of just past experience of BCBAs coming into school. And, we talk a lot about like stuff teachers are doing, they could be doing differently, but we talk about it again from the perspective of we've been there. We've done it. Yeah.
We've done it. We've had the pitfalls. Been there, done that, learn from our experiences and to move forward and grow.
Had the Skittle thrown back at me.
Yeah. Yeah. Had the bites. So
I don't want it. Yeah. Okay.
But I as we kind of wind this talk down, I'm sure we'll come back around to reinforcement in the coming weeks. But I just think about that social validity thing, right? Reinforcement increases a behavior. So we use reinforcement to target behaviors that we want to actually happen. And we just need to make sure that there is some socially valid reason that we want those behaviors to actually happen. Yeah. I think about like stimming, some of the stimming behavior that we see with autism. And I've seen teachers actually try to punitively get it out. So using punishment to try to reduce it or try to reinforce something else. But you got to ask yourself, is it truly a socially valid thing to replace when we start talking about replacement behaviors? And maybe that would be a good topic for a whole week.
I think too, because we were going to touch a bit on schedules of reinforcement. I think it's important that you don't have to stay stuck on the same schedule of reinforcers. So like, I think that would be like a great ending. Like if there's anything you take, there's a lot to take away, but the last bit is, you're not going to be giving the Skittle to an individual forever. You're not going to be giving a physical Skittle forever either. And so, that's the process. It's the dance of the behavior. It's the dance of reinforcement. We might have to thicken that schedule of reinforcement, which meaning we have to put it on a little bit heavier at the beginning and then we fade back. But, some days are better than others and we have to go back and then fade it back out. So it's just, something to remember.
Yeah, we're going to talk on social skills next week and the idea of teaching social skills, which should be an interesting topic because I think probably all four of us come at it from a little bit different perspective. I mean, I have my own feelings about it, but when we're talking about reinforcing, I think of an IEP not an IEP, it was a service plan we saw recently, and the child was being reinforced for tapping an adult for attention. And you've got to be really careful about the things that you reinforce because we want generalization. And do you really want to teach a kid to go and associate reinforcement to going up to a stranger and tapping them for attention, especially someone with low cognition or a disability? All these things have to be very mindful. And Kate and Katie really touched on it when they were talking about the planned ignoring thing. And planned, there's got to be a plan. Everything that we do has to be planned out, especially our reinforcement. Don't get stuck with your feet in cement just because you found a reinforcement schedule that works. That's great. That's fantastic. Now what do? Well, we fade it out because life isn't always instantaneous reinforcement, except for Cooper and Buddy.
I was just about to say, Chad, I'm really sorry. Like I haven't faded you out. I have tuned you out because these dogs.
They're so cute.
Oh, they were looking at me. I had to do
For Cooper and Buddy, everything is about instantaneous rreinforcement. They have instructions.
Our pets are a different story. I don't know.
Yes.
We give them socks when they want socks, and we're bad at that. But so anyway, it's 9:35, I think, or 10:35. So managed to not go too far over, but want to thank everybody for joining us. We've got a pretty entertaining lineup coming up. So next week we'll talk about social skills and what that looks like in an educational world and from an ABA perspective. The week after that, we're going to talk about augmentative communication and who actually is doing the talking. And then the following week, we are going to do what role does sensory really play in behavior? And the focus will be on making students and children successful in all environments despite barriers, aversive barriers. So I hope you keep tuning in. Hope you're enjoying it. And with that, I will say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Hey, everyone. Love you.
All right, we'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye-bye.